a tremendous tariff on lumber and things as such, and yet we don't need their lumber. We have more lumber than they do. We don't need Canada's lumber.
Let's be clear. Canada does not dump lumber into the United States. And we will continue to make the case that these current and proposed duties are unjustified.
So what we expect is that we just see price increases in the U.S. And so they can, provide a little bit more lumber within their supply, but there's no way that they can replace the imports coming from Canada.
Hey, welcome back to the channel. It all began with a single line that sounded more like a warning than a statement. We don't need cars or lumber from Canada. When Donald Trump said it, most thought it was just political noise, another headline meant to grab attention. But soon after, those words turned into real policy. The White House introduced a new national security tariff on imported lumber, and almost overnight, the markets reacted. Here's the twist. The United States imports about 1/3 of all the lumber it uses, and 85% of that comes from Canada. In other words, Washington had just taxed the very supply chain that keeps its housing market alive. With total duties now approaching 45%, the highest level in decades, prices surged past $650 per thousand board feet, and analysts warned they could climb even higher. Experts at Brookings and the National Association of Home Builders warned that every additional $10,000 in housing costs could push millions of Americans out of homeownership. What was meant to protect American jobs suddenly threatened one of its most fragile industries, and in the process gave Canada a surprising advantage. So, when Trump said America didn't need Canada's lumber, could it be that he just handed Canada exactly what it needed? Before we begin, hit that like button if you're finding this eye-opening. It really helps us beat the algorithm. And that's where the real problem begins. Once the tariffs kicked in, the numbers told a story no one in Washington wanted to face. Canada supplies roughly 12 billion board feet of softwood lumber, nearly a quarter of all U.S. demand. Even if every domestic mill in America ran flat out, the country would still fall short by more than 3.2 billion board feet, a gap that simply can't be closed in the short term. Some experts argue that even in the best-case scenario, with record investment, new mills, and full employment, it would take 8 to 10 years for the U.S. to fully replace Canadian supply. But that's assuming there's enough labor, capital, and raw timber to make it possible. Right now, most American sawmills are already running at around 95% capacity, struggling with worker shortages and outdated infrastructure. The result? Construction costs are climbing fast. Home builders are paying more for every frame, every beam, every nail. What began as a tariff to protect American jobs is now inflating the cost of living and feeding a new cycle of price pressure across the housing market. It's a reminder that some dependencies can't be broken overnight, and that the price of independence can sometimes be higher than the cost of partnership. If you've made it this far, you probably care. Consider subscribing to stay updated. While the U.S. wrestled with shortages and rising costs, Canada took a very different path. Instead of striking back with counter tariffs, Ottawa chose strategy over emotion, a long-term repositioning rather than a short-term retaliation. Prime Minister Mark Carney announced a $500 million support package to help softwood producers diversify their export markets and reduce dependence on the United States. In total, the federal government has committed up to $1.2 billion, about US $870 million, to shield the sector from anti-dumping duties and to strengthen its competitive base abroad. British Columbia's Minister of Forests, Ravi Parmar, set a clear target: redirect at least 10% of lumber exports away from the U.S. toward new markets. For Ottawa, this is not just about weathering a tariff storm. It's about redefining how Canadian wood fits into the global value chain. Government reports describe this moment as an opportunity to reestablish the role of Canadian lumber in the world's supply networks. Provinces like British Columbia and Alberta, long dependent on U.S. demand, are now being prioritized for infrastructure investment, innovation grants, and trade missions, laying the groundwork for a permanent pivot. In other words, where Washington built walls, Canada quietly started building bridges, not only to protect an industry, but to reshape its future. As tariffs reshaped North American trade, two neighbors began moving in opposite directions. While the U.S. built barriers, Canada opened doors. For decades, nearly 90% of Canadian lumber exports flowed south, a dependence that once seemed permanent. But after the tariff shock, that pattern broke. Producers are now expanding into South Korea, Vietnam, India, Australia, the UK, the EU, and new markets across the Middle East and North Africa. Japan, once a secondary buyer, boosted imports by about 26% in early 2024, showing renewed confidence in Canada's stability. Later deals with Germany and South Korea reinforced that momentum, anchoring Canada's role in the Asia-Pacific as a trusted supplier amid global uncertainty. At home, major forestry and logistics firms are upgrading infrastructure at ports like Vancouver and Prince Rupert to meet surging global demand. Every outbound shipment now symbolizes more than trade. It marks Canada's evolution from dependency to influence. Meanwhile, south of the border, the picture darkens. Stalled projects, rising costs, and material shortages. A quiet reminder that while protectionism shuts one door, it often opens another, just not where it was intended. As the U.S. struggles to contain rising costs, a quiet shift in power is unfolding, and it's moving north. What began as a defensive adjustment is now turning into a structural transformation. Canada is no longer just America's lumberyard, it's becoming a global supplier. Canadian producers are deepening their integration with international partners, negotiating new green supply chain agreements with the European Union under the CETA framework. The goal is ambitious but clear: to turn Canadian lumber into the green steel of the 21st century, a low-carbon material central to sustainable construction and clean energy projects worldwide. Ironically, the high lumber prices driven by U.S. tariffs are helping Canadian companies strengthen their global position. Firms like West Fraser, Canfor, and Interfor have expanded exports outside the U.S. by 15 to 20% in 2025 alone, redirecting volume toward markets where stability and climate standards carry more weight than politics. Across Western Canada, mills are investing heavily in value-added production, from furniture-grade wood to advanced engineered materials, signaling a move away from raw exports toward a diversified, innovation-based model. In effect, every new order from Europe or Asia represents more than a trade win. It's evidence that the center of gravity in the North American lumber economy has shifted, and that Canada is learning to thrive not because of U.S. policy, but in spite of it. The impact was no longer theoretical. The tariff wall meant to protect American jobs had turned into a wall of rising costs, one that families and builders were forced to climb. According to the National Association of Home Builders, every 1% rise in lumber prices adds over $1,000 to the cost of a new home. With prices projected at $765 per thousand board feet, that means more than $10,000 extra for the same house, without better materials or higher wages. Brookings put it plainly: tariffs on lumber don't protect industry, they just make Americans poorer. That truth is now visible across Texas, Ohio, and Florida, where countless construction projects have been delayed or abandoned due to shortages and volatile prices. The promised rebound in U.S. forestry jobs never came. Domestic mills remain hampered by high costs, old equipment, and limited capacity, still less competitive than Canada's even under tariff protection. In the end, the policy built barriers not just at the border, but within the economy itself, between affordability and ownership, growth and stagnation. What began as a moment of uncertainty has become something far larger, a quiet rebalancing of global supply chains, with Canada now at the center. The tariffs that once threatened to choke its lumber industry have instead triggered a transformation few expected. By reducing its dependence on the U.S., Canada is spreading risk and expanding reach, forging durable ties across Europe and Asia. Federal investments are already helping Western provinces recover from the 2021-2023 downturn, modernize mills, and reopen Pacific trade routes. According to RBC, if current momentum continues, Canada could become the largest lumber export hub outside Northern Europe by 2027. It's an ambitious outlook, but one that reflects a shifting global order, where reliability and sustainability define power. Meanwhile, in Washington, protectionism has done the opposite of what it promised. As tariffs inflate costs and stall construction, Canada is quietly occupying the space America left behind. So the question remains, can protectionism really protect, or has it built a bridge that leads straight to Ottawa? In the end, this isn't just about lumber or tariffs. It's about strategy, how nations respond to pressure, and how choices meant to defend can sometimes reshape the balance of power. Whether this shift becomes a lasting realignment or just a passing chapter will depend on what both countries do next. What do you think? Is Canada's rise a sign of resilience or America's miscalculation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for sticking around. If you found this valuable, like and subscribe to support more content like this.